Are you going to update your insect strengths and weaknesses spreadsheet is one of the most frequently asked questions I've been asked since the Into the Wood update for Grounded was released. I have some good news and some bad news, and in this video I'll share both with you. Before we begin, I want to thank the Overseer91, Grey Knight, Baz Channel, and all my other channel members who help make videos like this possible. Let's get started. So like I said in the intro, I have some good news and some bad news. Let's start off with the good news. The good news is this spreadsheet, which I've shared around before and people have probably seen, has been partially updated. That's the good news. So the stuff you see over here on the left, the candy upgrades, I did update. What I ended up doing was I ended up testing. Originally, I was only going to test the new insects that were out of the game. So the stuff that was added in the upper yard, black ox beetle, termites, the dust mites, and so forth and so on. So I did test all those a couple of weeks ago and recorded what all of their strengths and weaknesses were in terms of the candy upgrades. And I wasn't going to really go back and test the older ones, but I said, you know what, let me just go back and do some spot checking and see if any of them changed. And lo and behold, I found that some of them actually did change. So then what I ended up doing was, because I wanted to make sure I had everything right, I went back and I tested all of them. So you're going to notice here, I'm going to go through each one of them really quickly in just a second and show you what changed. So that's the good news is the candy upgrades, to the best of my ability or to the best of my knowledge, these will be as right as possible. So you can refer to this sheet. You should already have the link. I will leave a link for it down in the description below. But these should be updated, and it's the best information I have right now. And like I said, I did testing. When I did the testing this time, instead of just eyeballing it, I actually did the attacks, then took the screenshots and matched them up to make sure that see exactly where the health bars were. The only issue is and the bad news is the damage types I did not test. And and then the reason I didn't test them was not because I didn't want to, it's because I actually cannot test them. And the reason for that is a lot of the weapons in the game had their base damage changed, and then also because of the upgrades, the changes in upgrades using the quartzite, using the smithing station, there is no way to actually get a weapon of each type that does not already have some kind of built-in candy upgrade. Like, basically you have to eliminate the Salt Morningstar, you have to eliminate the Mint Mace, you have to eliminate the new Spicy Coltana. Those can't be used because they have built-in candy upgrades. So those have to be eliminated. But unfortunately, what ended up happening was, in the changes they made, when I actually went through and looked at it, there's just no way to actually get a weapon with each of the different 5 different types. So there are chopping, slashing, stabbing, smashing, and stabbing. I think I said all 5 of them, but there's 5 different attack types. And the problem is there's no way to get a weapon of each type that has the exact same amount of damage. Now, in-game, they might look like they have the same amount of damage because the game rounds off to the nearest bar or half bar. So if something says, let's say, for example, just something says it's when you do the upgrade, it's actually like 1.4 damage, it's probably going to round up to 1.5 bars. If something's 2.075, it's going to probably show 2 bars. And those little bit of differences, while they might not seem significant, they are actually significant, especially when you level your weapons up and when you're trying to do the testing. The other issue is you can't go past level 5, otherwise you start introducing the candy upgrades. And like I said, I looked at all the combinations. There's just no way to test all these. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to update the damage types here. I didn't even test them on the new insects, honestly, because if you saw my previous video where I showed what the best weapons were for each one of these, it just ends up being the best weapons in the game. So you're talking about the tier 3 weapons. Those are going to be your best options. The spears and daggers just don't perform well. And the tier 1 and tier 2 weapons for the other types just don't perform as well. So you're just going to end up using the same couple of tier 3 weapons against pretty much everything in the upper yard. Now, these ones over here for the previous insects and the other creatures, like the bots down here, like I said, I have no idea if these are still accurate. I would imagine they wouldn't have changed these, because I don't know why they would have just randomly changed them, because I don't know. But they may have changed, because as you're going to see in just a second, some of the candy upgrades change. So with that disclaimer out of the way, what I want to do is I'm going to quickly go through these and tell you what changed, and it should be pretty simple. So what I tried to do, and I think this is pretty accurate, I may have missed 1 or 2, I'm not sure, but I try to keep it up as accurate as possible in terms of not what's actually the right information, but which ones I changed. So what I did was I color-coded things here when I changed something. So for example, and we'll just go by line so it's easy. Lawn Mite, no major weaknesses, no major resistances, same as before. The Red Worker Ant, prior to this update, prior to the Into the Wood update, I'm pretty sure it didn't have any weaknesses in terms of candy upgrades. It's now weak to Spicy, has no major resistance. Larva did not change. The Red Soldier Ant was always weak to Spicy, but now is weak to, or actually now is resistant to Salty, so that has changed. So Don't use salty weapons against a red soldier ant. Stink bug did not change. Bombardier beetle did not change. Ladybug. Ladybug, prior to this update, had no major resistances. The ladybug is now resistant to salt. So I think what they ended up doing was because salt didn't really have a lot of weaknesses or resistances, they started putting it in on some of the older insects, so it actually has more relevance. Spiderlings. Prior to this update, the spiderlings had no strengths or had no weaknesses or resistances. They are now weak to spicy like the other spiders, and they are resistant to fresh like the other spiders. No change to the Orb Weaver. Orb Weaver Jr. has the same thing. The Orb Weaver Jr. did not have any weaknesses or resistances prior to the Into the Wood update. They are now, like all the other spiders, weak to spicy and resistant to fresh. And then the only other change now, actually none of these changes are all exactly the same. For some reason, the Broodmother is actually resistant to salty as well. So that's the only difference. So if you look at all the spiders, except for the infected wolf spider, which we'll talk about at the bottom, all the regular spiders are going to be weak to spicy, and then they're going to be resistant to fresh. And then the Broodmother, you also don't want to use salty against her. I did test the underwater insects, or creatures, whatever you want to call them. Tadpole and water boatman had no weaknesses. So no weaknesses, no resistances, no change there. The water flea and the diving bell spider, however, did change. So the water flea is actually weak to fresh and salty, but is resistant to spicy. The diving bell spider, and I actually laughed when I did this because I knew when I started testing these that this was going to end up coming back. I did a whole video because there was always a rumor that diving bell spiders were weak to salty. I did a video, it was a Mythbusters, are diving bell spiders weak to salty? I did extensive testing. They were not weak to salty. Guess what happened in the End of the Wood update? Diving bell spiders are now weak to salty, and they're resistant to fresh. So just keep that in mind when you're fighting them. They actually, salty weapons will do better against them. Now, of course, when you're fighting the underwater insects, the only things you can actually use are spears and daggers. So I believe these actually are the same, although like I said, I didn't actually test any daggers under the water. I basically just used a trident. Moving on to the flying insects, we got the mosquito, firefly, and bee. The only change here that I noticed was the mosquito is now weak to salty. So prior to this update, the mosquito only seemed to be weak to fresh, but now the mosquito is also weak to salty, which is in line with the firefly. However, the bee is not, and you'll see the bee is actually resistant to salty down here and spicy. I did go in and check all the infected insects. So I went into the haze, checked all the infected insects. The gnat and the weevil, no strengths, no weaknesses. So nothing to worry about there. Infected mite. I'm pretty sure the infected mite had nothing prior to this update. After the Into the Wood update now, the infected mite is in line with the other infected insects that have weaknesses. It is actually weak to fresh. And like the infected larva, it is resistant to salty and spicy, so don't use those weapons against them. Moving down to the trash heap stuff / the Black Anthill lab area. Meaty gnats, nothing. I tested all the different weapons, all the different upgrades on them. They have no weakness, no resistance. No changes here on the black soldier ants, and actually it looks like none of these actually changed. So to my knowledge, none of these changed. I'm pretty sure, yeah, I don't think any of those changed. The Tase T, so we're going to get into the robots here. Tase Ts prior to this update did not have any weaknesses. They are now clearly weak to salty and spicy, so using a salty and spicy weapon against them is going to do more damage. Don't use fresh. Archers, no change to them. Same things here. Assistant Manager is weak to salty, but is now resistant to spicy, so do not use spicy against them. I think prior to this, I think it was like neutral against spicy and fresh, but now it was a clear difference that spicy does less damage than fresh, which also does less damage than salty. And then moving on down here to the new insects, in case you didn't see my other video, black ox beetle, termite, and the termite, 3 different termites are all weak to salt. The black ox beetle did not show any resistances, while the termite and the termite soldiers were resistant to fresh and spicy, and for some reason the termite king is resistant to fresh, but spicy just had a neutral effect on him. The dust mite green shield bug, infected wolf spider, ladybird, and ladybird larva all are weak to fresh, so use fresh weapons against them. Probably going to want to use Club of the Mother Demon fresh or the mint mace, or you can just use a bow that has fresh arrows on most of these guys. The dust mite and green shield bug have no resistances, while the infected wolf spider, the ladybird, are both resistant to salty, and the ladybird larva is resistant to spicy. In fact, the ladybird larva, I'm not sure, I didn't test it after the final patch. The ladybird larva was like super ultra resistant to spicy. Like the best spicy weapons were doing no damage against them. Roly-polies, they're in line with the sickly roly-polies, so as you'll see here, no change there. They are actually weak to spicy and have no resistance. And the scarabs, the new creatures that drop the twinkling shells, they have no weaknesses or no strengths. So that's all the updates to the candy upgrades. And what I did was I actually put together some picture. I put these in like a little like white, nice little one slide, one picture image, and I'm going to show you those real quick. But this, I'm going to leave the link for this down below. This hasn't changed. But before I show you those pictures, what I want to like make sure you know, I did not check the damage types. There's just no way I can do this because there's no way to actually test the weapons, because I can't get weapons that are all doing the exact same amount of damage for each damage type. And these over here, these other tabs for the individual bugs, I have not touched these, and I have not added the ones for the new ones. And honestly, I don't think I'm going to do that, because I might actually hide these, because they're just not going to be able to be updated properly, because they factor in the weaknesses here. So the only thing I would be able to do on these would be to just show whether or not they were weak to, let's say, spicy. But that's not going to help you out, because if you use a spicy weapon, and let's pick one here that's like this. So the red soldier ant's weak to spicy and weak to stabbing. So theoretically, like a spear or a spicy arrow would do the most damage, give you the 150% bonus. However, using a slashing weapon, so using a sword, so if you use the Antlion Greatsword or the Black Ant Sword with salt, it's going to do the least amount of damage. And there's just no way telling you that in that other sheet, because actually, let's say spicy. If you use a spicy sword, it would do the 125, but then this would do the 75, so it would cancel out. So I don't want to get into the math because I don't want to bore you guys, but basically these other tabs here, I'm probably going to hide them for now, because there's just no reason to show them anymore, because they're just not accurate, because there's no way for me to get the actual damage types. So as I said, I put all this in a nice little one picture for each one. So we have one for the upgrades, and the way you can look at this is I color coded. I try to make it as easy as possible. First column, the aqua is going to be fresh. Every insect in that column is weak to fresh attacks. In the center is going to have salt, so the white are salt. And then, of course, on the right are going to be spicy, so they're all weak to spicy. You will notice that there are some that are in two things. So, for example, the firefly is weak to fresh and is also weak to salty. So just be mindful of that when you're skimming through this, that there are some insects that have multiple weaknesses. And when we look at the resistance, you're going to see there's some that have multiple resistances. And here's the same thing except for the resistances. And like I said, fresh is going to be the aqua, center is going to be the white, which is going to be salty, and the right is going to be spicy. Now, one thing you may have noticed, I did remove Mighty from my spreadsheet completely too. I forgot to mention that earlier. I've been told over and over again that Mighty is not a damage type. And one of the mods in the Grounded Discord said Mighty's not a damage type. Nothing should be weak or strong against it. So what I ended up doing was going back and looking, and I did a little bit of testing with the Mighty, and in fact, I think what ended up happening probably before, because Mighty was doing more damage, it may have actually looked like the insects were actually weak to Mighty when they weren't, although I don't know. So, like I said, I just took Mighty out completely, because I was told by that mod that the Mighty is not a damage type, and they actually showed the patch notes, which I've seen before. The patch notes do not have Mighty listed as a damage attack, or one of the categories that could be weak or strong, and those are fresh, salty, spicy, and then the damage types. So, of course, you have chopping, slashing, smashing, stabbing, and I always forget one. Chopping. Did I say chopping? I said chopping. Chopping, slashing, stabbing, whatever, the 5 are. Plus, I think explosives is one. I don't test for explosives because the explosives don't tell me how much damage they do. So there's no way for me to know unless I sat there, and I don't even know how I would do it. Like, I would have to, like, take a picture of every single insect and see what how much damage they took from explosives versus other things. But there's just, without having the damage amount for the explosives, it's not even worth the time to do it. So I don't use explosives on enemies anyway, so let's not worry about those. But basically, like I said, this is going to be the best information I have right now. We're supposed to be getting the bestiary insectopedia, whatever you want to call it, hopefully in the next update, if not sometime in the future, where all this information is going to be somehow in the UI, whether they just give it to us or we have to figure it out or research it or whatever. It'll be there at some point in the future. But anyway, I'm going to leave a link for the spreadsheet down in the description below. If you want these pictures here that you can download, they will be on my Discord. There's a link for my Discord down in the description below as well. I will make sure I tell you what channel they're in. They're in the Grounded Resources channel. If you want to go over there and download those, make sure you hop over there and do that. Anyway, hopefully this will help you guys out. And like I said, I did the best that I possibly could with the information that's available, with the way they made the changes. I did the best that I possibly could. So anyway, if you found this video helpful, make sure you hit the like button and consider subscribing for more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.